Being a WWE fan can be hard work for a number of reasons, but the world's biggest sports entertainment enterprise has made it especially difficult for their so-called universe with some of the uneasy, distressing, or downright disturbing content they have churned out over the years. Whether it's a vile promo, ghastly backstage segment, or miscalculated bit of in-ring action, certain moments have long stayed with viewers for the wrong reasons. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 deeply uncomfortable WWE moments. Join us. Number 10. The First Lady's foul farewell. The May 1st, 2003 death of Elizabeth Hewlett, better known to WWE fans as Miss Elizabeth at the age of just 42, was another in a long line of sad wrestling tragedies. Given her prominence during the 1980s and early 90s, it was only right that WWE paid tribute to Randy Savage's ex, which they did via a segment on their weekly magazine-style show Confidential. Paying tribute was all well and good, but WWE, in a rather desperate bid to pop a rating, decided to play the 911 call placed by her boyfriend Lex Luger as well. Not only that, but they also went in depth on the substance abuse issues the couple reportedly had, with Vince McMahon somehow managing to get a dig in on WCW in the process, as well as the total package's recent run-ins with the law. It was gross that WWE hyped up the phone call during the show as a way to get fans to stick around and watch until the end, and the call itself made for deeply uncomfortable listening, with Luger at one point confiding that he was scared to death. This was not informative or entertaining television, it was exploitative and unnecessary. Number 9. 3-minute mauling. Speaking of cheap ratings ploys, how about that HLA? For those fortunate enough not to know what HLA stands for, allow me to spell things out for you. HLA stood for Hot Lesbian Action. And if you're wondering what that had to do with WWE Raw in September of 2002, well, that was kind of par for the course at the time, I'm afraid. HLA was introduced by Raw General Manager Eric Bischoff, and while the build-up to their segment itself was excruciating, the so-called payoff was somehow much, much worse. After some in-ring touchy-feely directed by Bischoff, the two lesbians, played by UPW performers Jennifer Looney Lane and Sasha Savvy Bryant, were set upon by Samoan super heavyweights Rosie and Jamal because the segment had gone on for 3 minutes too long. 3-minute warning proceeded to decimate the poor girls, including Jamal giving Lane an excessively stiff kick that bruised her ribs and knocked the wind out of her. After the beating was delivered, TNN was flooded with complaints, compelling the station to release a statement noting that they took issue with the content, didn't condone it, and would work to ensure similar scenes did not take place on their watch. 1 month later, Casey Vick. Number 8. The Stairway to Hell. If there's any WWE star who doesn't need any extra help in coming across like an intimidating monster, it is Brock Lesnar. The next big thing already had the size, aura, and credentials to strike fear into the hearts of fans and his fellow WWE stars alike, yet his character took a new unhinged direction after he turned heel and joined Mr. McMahon in 2003. 3 weeks after he destroyed one-legged wonder kid Zach Gowen in a brutal and bloody squash match, which was uncomfortable in its own right, Lesnar continued to torture poor Zach, whose one leg was now broken. Now using a wheelchair and with his mouth duct taped shut, Gowen had to sit and suffer at the hands of Brock, who taunted him unmercifully and punched him on his cast before dumping him to the floor. He wasn't finished, however, because for the grand finale, Lesnar placed Zach back in the chair, choked him with his t-shirt, and then launched him, actually a stuntman, down a flight of stairs. Sorry, am I watching WWE SmackDown or Brock Portrait of a Serial Killer here? A super unsettling segment that felt like it lasted an age. Number 7. Gory Guerrero. The pressure was on Eddie Guerrero to deliver in the main event of Judgment Day 2004. Latino Heat was the WWE champion, and the man looked upon to carry a SmackDown brand light on star power, as evidenced by his opponent on the night. WWE had gone to great lengths to remake Bradshaw into a credible main event player, but the jury was still out on JBL, and his first night in the headline slot could well have been his last. The pressure evidently got to Eddie, who hit an artery while doing a blade job following following a stiff chair shot to the head. Guerrero bled a gusher to the point that the canvas soon began to resemble an actual crime scene. It was a spectacular sight, no doubt, but fans watching couldn't help but feel legitimately concerned for the beloved champion who shed so much claret that it's a wonder he didn't pass out in the ring. That may not have happened, but Eddie did go into shock backstage and had to be taken to the hospital afterwards. Doctors there suggested a blood transfusion, which he turned down, and ultimately had to put 2 bags of fluid in him. Number 6, Foley's head is ready to be rumbled. WWE fans knew it was going to take something severe to get Mankind to cry uncle when he clashed with The Rock in an I Quit match at the 1999 Royal Rumble pay-per-view. After all, the world champion had gotten up and kept going after being thrown off and then through Hell in a Cell in the not-too-distant past. Yet while those awe-inspiring bumps booked their place on the highlight reel for eternity, what Mick Foley put himself through when going up against the Great One will never be replayed. It was hard at the time watching Mrs. Foley's baby boy take unprotected chair shot after unprotected chair shot to the head, 11 in total, and while his hands were cuffed behind his back no less. But it's just that much worse watching it now, given how much more we know about head trauma. It's even harder to watch after you've seen the documentary Beyond the Mat, which shows Foley's traumatized wife and kids watching the onslaught from ringside. Nick readily admitted that the match's finish went too far and wisely began to rely on sweat socks soon after. Number 5, Stephanie's accusation. Few storylines in WWE history have been as bizarre as the feud between Vince McMahon and his daughter Stephanie. The psychosexual Freudian nightmare played out over the course of several agonizing months, culminating in a disturbing I Quit match at No Mercy. The visual of Vince choking the billion-dollar princess with a lead pipe is what most remember, but the saga was full of eyebrow-raising moments, such as on the June 19, 2003 episode of SmackDown, when the Blue Brand's general manager interrupted her father's rendezvous with Sable and cut a promo where she accused him of essentially pimping her out to business associates when she was just 17. No, really. An emotional Steph claimed that Vince would send her out on dates with these associates on the promise that she would do certain things, which she did and now felt ashamed about. Right then. Not only did this plot twist come completely out of left field, but due to the serious allegations leveled against Vince in recent years, it has aged about as well as Vince's plastic surgery-filled face. Not that it was easy to sit and watch at the time either, of course. Number 4, grilling JR. Some in WWE's higher circle seemingly got off on the ritual humiliation of Jim Ross, which often took place in the commentator's beloved home state of Oklahoma. And while you can argue about the value, or lack thereof, when it comes to stuff like Dr. Heine or Ross joining Mr. McMahon's special club, nobody will, or at least nobody should, leap to the defense of the indefensible. And that is exactly what the on-air incidents mocking JR's Bell's palsy condition were. The first is little remembered, but took place on the March 14th, 1999 episode of Sunday Night Heat, when Million Dollar Man wannabe Tiger Ali Singh plucked a fan, actually WWE creative team member Ed Ferrara, out of the crowd and paid him to impersonate Ross, who, it should be added, wasn't announcing at the time since he had experienced another debilitating bout of Bell's palsy a few months prior. Thankfully, Dr. Death Steve Williams, flanked by JR, ended the segment by suplexing Ferrara onto his stupid neck. Fans weren't so lucky when Vince McMahon unleashed his lamentable JR impression on the world during an episode of Raw some 13 years later. Be a star, eh? Number 3, a flair for the distasteful. Mixing a bit of reality into a storyline can be a rather effective tool, but WWE have every now and again gone way too far by incorporating actual tragedy into their fictional TV show. Such as when Randy Orton told Rey Mysterio that Eddie Guerrero was in hell, or when Nikki Bella told her twin sister Brie that she wished she had died in the womb. Charming. These were bad, yes, but one particularly awful line spoken in the pursuit of cheap heat had fans turning the channel, not sticking around in the hope of seeing the babyface get their revenge. In the closing contract signing segment of the November 16th, 2015 episode of Raw, Paige invoked the name of Charlotte Flair's late brother Reed, who passed away of a drug overdose in 2013, saying that he didn't have enough fight in him, did he? The backlash was swift, including Reed's father Ric Flair publicly saying that the line made him cry while revealing that he wasn't given a heads up about it beforehand. WWE soon put out a statement noting that personal subject matter is only approved with the advocacy of talent involved, while conceding that they as a company are ultimately responsible for what airs on their TV shows. Number 2. Raw grief. Just a few hours before he was scheduled to wrestle at the 1997 Bad Blood pay-per-view, Brian Pillman was tragically found dead in a Minnesota hotel room at the age of just 35. Just a day after the untimely passing of the loose cannon, WWE, in their infinite wisdom, decided to interview his widow Melanie live on Raw. Pillman's wife was clearly grieving as Vince McMahon, who else, asked her a bunch of questions about the nature of her husband's life and death. The tone of the questions also barely disguised WWE's ulterior motive, which was to absolve themselves of responsibility, as Vince asked Melanie what she thought about aspiring athletes misusing painkillers. Astonishingly, Vince even asked her what she would do next and how she intended to support her children. I'm sure WWE were thrilled when the show's ratings peaked during the interview, which they promoted throughout the show, and I hope it was worth putting an emotionally devastated woman in mourning who already had reservations about doing it on the air. By all accounts, Melanie was far from perfect, but she did not deserve having to go through this. Nobody does. Number 1. Sleazy E. WWE really didn't waste any time in humiliating Eric Bischoff when he came on board as an on-screen character in 2002. Vince McMahon seemed to derive great pleasure in crafting embarrassing scenarios for the man who beat him in the ratings 83 weeks in a row, yet he also greenlit segments that saw Eazy-E lock lips with both his wife and daughter. When Bischoff kissed Stephanie, it was weird, both because he was dressed up like her father at the start of the segment and because her father was actually in the room directing it in a rather animated fashion, according to the former WCW senior vice president. Weird, yes, but not nearly as strange and off-putting as the time Bischoff burst into the McMahon family residence and very forcefully kissed Linda. Though Vince wasn't physically present in the room for this one, he did give specific pre-filming instructions about how aggressive and unromantic he wanted the kiss to be, before watching his former enemy swap spit with Mrs. Charisma herself from a monitor in another room. Seriously, I think Freud would just give up. In the storyline, Vince would later admit that he let Bischoff into his house in order to carry out the assault, adding another grim layer to this despicable scenario.